As a channel who typically covers older, nostalgia-oriented topics, I do try to avoid romanticizing the past. Yes, there were things that were better back in those days, but there were also many things that were worse. It really is all relative at the end of the day, so it's not always fair to blanket something as being better. However, DVDs are an exception. We will mostly be talking about DVDs, but just the disc in general is an incredible feat in technology, more or less a digital repurposing of its indirect, distant ancestor, the vinyl record. Well, sort of, but we'll get to that. But rather than just storing sound, the optical disc could store a wide variety of mediums, ranging from music, video games, files, and most notably, movies in the forms of DVDs and eventually Blu-ray. A technology that has a history of versatility and permanence that has died off in favor of convenience. It is no secret that, for the past decade, streaming platforms have taken over the media space. Why own something physical that takes up space in your house or that you can lose or break, that you have to get up to put in the DVD player, when you can access that same content and so much more up in the cloud forever for $10 a month? It's a tempting option that, at the time, solved a lot of problems. Naturally, by 2019, DVD sales had declined by 86% since the start of the decade. But as streaming got more saturated with competition and omnipresent in the mainstream space, it introduced a lot of problems that simply didn't exist before. This includes information and even unique forms of entertainment becoming lost, such as DVD menus, commentary, bonus features, as well as losing the right to truly own something. For these reasons, we are seeing the disc make a comeback in certain sectors, which may only grow further with time. Where did it all start, and how did we get here? Mr. Jones is a ladies' man. He can get any girl he wants just with his charm and the wink of an eye. But that's just the problem. His eyes. Stop sign, where? Mr. Jones always knew something was wrong. He would never wear glasses because glasses are for squares. When I came to, I was visited by the ghost of Davy Crockett, who said I ought to wear glasses. Oh, the nerve on him. I'm a man who can make his own decisions, thank you very much. He had been so focused on his vanity that he couldn't see the world around him, or just how ignorant he was. Turn on the television or look at any fashion magazine, glasses are the new hottest thing, especially Warby Parker glasses. Mr. Jones chose the Chemi Wide pair in licorice crystal with the anti-reflective and scratch-resistant coating. Rather than something to be ashamed of, he learned that his glasses could be the most irresistible, iconic part of his style, while also maximizing his quality of life, the best of both worlds for any man. He did this by getting his glasses personally stylized with the help of Warby Parker's friendly in-store advisors. He wanted everyone to know that those glasses were his. And with the link and QR code on the screen, you too can get your own Warby Parker glasses today. Pairs start at $95 plus free shipping and free 30-day returns, along with the option to get vision insurance. For every pair of glasses you purchase through Warby Parker, another pair is given to someone in need through their Buy a Pair, Give a Pair program. Instead of being out of sight, be out of sight. Warby Parker. See it for yourself. As you know, before the advent of the internet and after the emergence of analog technology like the phonograph, physical media was how you could bring your entertainment home with you. In fact, it was the only way you could do that. Before that, if you wanted to listen to music or watch your entertainment, you had to go to a public venue. Physical media is nothing new, so what made the optical discs of the 90s and 2000s so special compared to its alternatives like floppies, tapes, records, and even its much larger ancestor, Laserdisc? The disc was now digital. You see, DVDs and CDs were one of the many technologies that helped introduce a new rivalry in the 80s and 90s.
the war on analog versus digital. Although superficially our eyes and ears can't tell the difference, analog and digital are different things. In short, analog is the literal, true representation of something, whether that's sound, video, etc., whereas digital is a set of instructions made up of binary ones and zeros that help create that thing. For example, analog devices like tapes, vinyl, and laserdisc store the information in the form of continuous waves, and their respective players read these waveforms off the storage medium that turn them into the things that we are supposed to see and hear. Cassettes store these waves in the form of magnetic tapes, vinyl stores them into grooves, and laserdisc reads them using, well, lasers. So when you are listening to your favorite album on a vinyl record, you are literally just hearing a needle bump against grooves at a really fast rate. The grooves create a unique pattern that, when played really fast, create that very specific song you're listening to. Groovy! That's where that comes from. Magnetic, optical, and even radio waveforms more or less followed the same principle. It all just depended on what type of device you were using. Then, computers became a thing. As they got smaller, cheaper, more powerful, and more personal, they started to become much more versatile. Instead of needing an 8-track tape player for your music, a telephone for talking, and a television for your viewing pleasure, a computer could do all three of these things in just one universal device. What if you could also have a universal storage device? And so, researchers began looking back at the Laserdisc. Now, the Laserdisc did not sell well, but it proved to be very influential in the long term. I mean, look how cool this thing is. It looks like a very large DVD, but behaves a lot like a vinyl record. Instead of needles on a groove, it's lasers on microscopic pits engraved in the disc that make up the waveforms as they would appear in pulse width modulation. And instead of just sound, it could also store video. But Laserdisc had its limitations. For one, analog information takes up quite a bit of space on a disc. People often had to get up in the middle of a movie and flip the disc to the other side to continue, much like a record. And arguably one of the biggest issues with Laserdisc, just like with any piece of analog equipment, it was susceptible to degradation and interference. Digital optical discs solved both of these problems. The data markings on a DVD are much, much smaller, meaning they can store a lot more information on them, while making the disc itself much more portable. This information also wasn't printed as some analog waveform, but instead printed in binary. It is this distinction that makes digital discs effectively immune to the kind of aging that analog experiences. Why is that? Because binary is the instructions that make the media, not the media itself. This is the main idea which separates digital and analog as technologies. Again, analog is the media's true form that has been modulated. Let's use those old rabbit ear televisions as an example. The radio signal that is being sent from the station over to the TV's antenna contains the actual image of the broadcast itself. So if there is a terrible thunderstorm happening outside, it's going to affect the picture quality of the broadcast, because the actual waveforms that make up that image are being messed with. These are smooth and continuous waves that are always changing to create the unique patterns that make up that specific image, meaning even mild interference can make the precise pattern ambiguous and therefore affect picture quality. When you show something in binary, on the other hand, it's not a continuous wave. It is either a 1 or a 0, and these numbers are formatted in ways that are very easy to spot, even with interference. Another analogy for this would be talking to someone on the telephone telling them to go walk the dog versus sending the same message as a telegram. The telephone is sending your literal voice over the line to communicate your message, whereas the telegram is sending over the instructions to create your message, which the translator on the other end decodes back into your message in printed form. Communication lines, especially in the early 1900s, were very susceptible to interference. So if you're talking on the phone, your voice will get distorted, and someone may not fully understand you. But if there's interference over a telegraph line, the dits and dahs that make up Morse code are already so distinguishable, the decoder can still translate the message just fine, making that form of communication often much more resilient. It kind of reminds me of that whole scene in Mad Men where they are trying to make an ad for Western Union and how it's better than making a phone call, stating that even the faintest ink is stronger than the best memory. Okay, here's another analogy for analog versus digital that hopefully makes a little more sense. Let's say this computer right here is your local TV station, and this laptop is an old TV set, the ones from the 50s with the antennas, yada yada. And let's say my really loud air conditioner over there is a terrible thunderstorm happening outside, so there's going to be some noise and interference. And let's say this audio file is a radio signal, and this analog radio signal contains the literal image of a triangle. So we're going to be broadcasting this signal over to our TV, which will give us a triangle on its picture. So we're going to turn our TV on and have our antenna listen for it. If I go to our spectrogram, as you can see, despite the interference, we still get the image of the triangle, but it's a little distorted. It doesn't look very good. This is more or less what would happen back in the olden days if there was bad weather and you were trying to watch TV. So what do? How do you work around this? That's where digital comes into play. So now it's the future. We have digital TVs that have these special decoders in them that can read binary. So instead of sending the literal image of the triangle, our digital TV station is going to be sending binary that contains instructions. As you can see, despite the interference, it doesn't matter because it didn't send us the triangle. It sent us a message saying, hey, create an image of a white triangle. The TV reads this and goes, okay, I'm going to put a white triangle on the screen. And it does exactly that. And that is how we can get a crisp image despite noisy interference. That's digital for you. Digital discs do the exact same thing by printing the binary data on them, which the player reads and then decodes into something that we can see and understand. Of course, there is a lot of data, so the reader has to read it very fast to accurately decode and depict what's on it. This is why they spin super fast, unlike a record player, which is much slower in comparison. Moreover, this data is located deep inside the disk, protected by a special coating. So if you get some scratches on the disk, it's not a big deal. Yes, the visibility of some of the binary on the disk may be a little obscured by the scratch on the coating, but the player can still easily tell that's a 1 or a 0 and go forward with the instructions as normal. You probably remember having to use toothpaste to get rid of scratches off a disk and wondered if that was even a real thing. And somehow, it would actually work. And yes, it did. Not because it's adding information back into the disk, you are simply filing down the scratches on the coating to make the binary on the disk more visible again. Even then, if a couple digits here and there are truly damaged, many digital disc readers have error correction techniques that can help fill in that missing information. Compared to analog media, this was truly a much more robust alternative. But of course, this decoding that disc readers have to do does take time. This is called latency, which is something analog doesn't really have to deal with. If the disk reader truly exhausted all its resources at fixing damaged information, it would just give up, and you would get the dreaded frozen screen. Now, if degradation is such a big problem, why not just print binary code on cassette to make that digital? Well, they did. In fact, many early computer programs, like for the Apple II, were stored as binary information on audio cassettes. But remember, tapes play things linearly, whereas a disc is rotational. with all the information being on one side at once. If I want to switch to another part of a song on a vinyl record, I can just pick up the needle and move it over to that song instantly. This is how Laserdisc was able to divide movies into chapters and switch over to those parts rather quickly. With tape, you have to rewind, fast forward. They are also very clunky and easy to break. Lach. The disc was thin, lightweight, and fast. And when digital came along and made them stronger and larger in capacity, these advantages only amplified. They primarily came in the form of the compact disc, CD, and most notably, the much more spacious digital versatile disc, or DVD. It was also marketed as the digital video disc, but the versatility of these things was no joke, and it was all thanks to the binary on them. Binary could be used for creating things beyond just audio and images, like computer programs, which the readers could create based on the tools at their disposal. As a result, you now had DVDs with interactive menus that were not just full of creativity and immersion, but also included bonus features, like behind-the-scenes content, accessibility settings and subtitles, and live DVD commentary. Just like with Laserdisc, you could also move to chapters on the DVD. But unlike Laserdisc, you did not have to flip it over to continue watching. DVDs theoretically could print on both sides, but the around 8 gigabytes of storage that they typically supported at this time was often more than enough for the content they included. So for simplicity, just one side was used, while the other was used for branding. DVDs and CDs also had a personal component to them, allowing for all kinds of customization. This is another factor that allowed it to support so many mediums. People were effectively using these as much more advanced replacements for floppy disks. Rewritable disks print binary information using a metallic alloy, which a laser can easily modify to add and remove bits. This is exactly what is happening when you add or remove things from these disks. This is also why it is called burning stuff onto a disk, because you literally are using this laser. And it is why your disk is warm when you take it out. Both the reading and writing of data by this laser generates heat. Now, commercial disks, like for video games, movies, and TV shows, are not rewritable because the binary data is physically stamped onto them rather than lasered in with a metallic alloy. It's permanent. These are known as CD-ROM or DVD-ROM, read-only memory. Then, in the summer of 2006, came the worldwide release of a new technology called Blu-ray. It more or less had the same functionality as a DVD, but the data was printed much smaller, meaning more storage and more precise detail. This allowed for the Blu-ray disc to garner a reputation for its high storage capacity and excellent quality. Thanks to the newest gaming console, the PlayStation 3, which included a Blu-ray player, Blu-ray's popularity skyrocketed. But Blu-ray players used a much smaller blue laser to read this tiny data. This is why if you put a Blu-ray disc in a DVD player, it won't work. But you can put a DVD in a Blu-ray player. It is backwards compatible. So, for around the next decade, you have an era of physical media that embraced creativity and interactivity with the person using it, but the technology itself was seemingly getting better. You even had really cool computer programs such as iDVD, which let you create your own DVDs at home with their own interactive menus, just like an industry standard one. You even had these really cool DVD and CD cases and binders that really added a lot of personality and organization to your collection. There was a sort of shared experience that came with DVD releases as well. I remember when a movie that was in theaters finally came out on DVD, it was almost always released on a Tuesday. Apparently the reason for this was because they didn't want retailers potentially releasing the DVDs early if they were shipped in on the weekend, and because sales were typically tracked by the week. So releasing it early gave them a head start on maximizing their initial sales count. So Tuesday often became the industry standard. But it also let a lot of people know when a movie was coming out, so they could flock to the store to get it. Very big releases, such as video games, would often happen on a Friday. I remember the day Skyrim came out. I lived in a very small town at the time, but despite that, our local GameStop was packed, where we all waited outside in line to get the game. But of course, with the passage of time, once people got so accustomed to using DVDs, CDs in their daily lives, the inconveniences of them were starting to get on people's nerves. Yes, digital discs were great at error correction and fighting against damage and scratches, but accidents still happened more than people wanted them to. Also, in an increasingly growing online world with platforms like YouTube, Hulu, and Netflix getting exponentially popular by the early 2010s, going out to the store to buy a new DVD or CD that cluttered up your house was becoming more of a hassle when you could easily stream the same content and so much more over the internet without ever having to get off your couch at a fair and fixed price. For this reason, retailers even stopped selling discs altogether because the demand had drastically lowered. Entire businesses, such as Borders and Blockbuster, even completely went under because of this. So streaming, downloading, and the act of cord cutting started to take over physical media. And for a while, it worked. Streaming even brought down piracy rates. However, the streaming industry would soon become its own worst enemy. Companies were now taking their content off of platforms like Netflix so that they could start their own streaming platforms and charge the same price. When you have 10, 15 different streaming platforms all doing this, it becomes insanely expensive. And there's no guarantee that the content you're subscribing for is even going to be there forever. And arguably, the most controversial thing about streaming platforms is that newer releases typically don't offer a physical media alternative, at least not one that is as easy to obtain as it was before. This means you are often left no other choice but to rely on the streaming service, just deciding to keep that content up, but it could still go away at any moment, offering no recourse. There are services that essentially let you buy e-DVDs, which let you own a copy forever for a one-time fee, but there have even been reports of people still losing access to these, even though they paid for the right to permanently own it. It is much easier for a centralized streaming service to just take content off their platform than it is for them to physically break into your house and steal your DVD set. This is also, weirdly enough, creating a bit of a lost media problem. A lot of movies and shows that are not on streaming platforms are sometimes impossible to get, depending on their popularity. You also have the loss of some secondary content. Apollo 13 is one of my favorite movies of all time, and I decided to rewatch it the other day, and I was wondering which parts of the movie were real to the true story and which were just dramatizations. Turns out, the DVD has a video commentary where the actual people from the Apollo 13 story watch the movie and discuss in real time which parts really happened and which didn't. But I don't own the DVD, and this commentary wasn't anywhere online, so I couldn't watch it. Now, Apollo 13 is a very popular movie, so I could easily buy the DVD online, but what about the more underground movies? One of my all-time favorite video games growing up, the movie Stunts and Effects, also has this problem. It is a very obscure game that is not available on any gaming platform and is hard to find copies of online. The online executable versions of the game that people have uploaded to the internet are also not very reliable. So I'm kind of just SOL on that one. We were willing to accept these new problems that streaming introduced because the convenience it provided made it worth it. But what happens when that convenience goes away as well, and you are only left with the problems? This is why DVDs and physical media altogether is somewhat making a comeback. Not just for the reasons of guaranteed lifetime ownership of something and the other things I talked about, but also because people do enjoy the novelty of owning something that looks cool. This is also why vinyl is making a comeback, with sales being the highest they've been since the 1980s. Not only do they enjoy the warm, rich sound that analog recordings and things like Verispeed often provide, but the artists get more of a share in the revenue with each purchase, and it's just a cool thing to own and to hold. DVDs are entering this bunch too, even in a communal sense. I talked about this in my video about piracy, but many people are putting up Blockbuster boxes in their neighborhoods. Basically, anyone can take a DVD out of the box for free as long as they swap it with another DVD. Not only does it give people more options for things that they otherwise may not have access to, but it enhances their sense of community because they are, once again, all watching and doing the same thing. By putting everything on the internet, we've ironically grown further apart. And I think it is the tangible things, even small things like DVDs, that remind us of how we continue to have the privilege to connect with one another in real life. We may have taken DVDs for granted when they were at their peak, but it's not too late to cherish the real life, valuable time we can all have together. If you would like to learn more about yesterday's technology, you can check out another video right here. A special thanks to my Patreon supporters. Check out patreon.com/nationsquid for ad-free videos and exclusive content. You can also check out my second channel all about the history of the Beatles. Buying me a coffee is always appreciated too. Thank you for watching, everyone.